Buoy Four had been coughing for 4 years, and overnight the cough had learned a new trick. It had started arriving late. Not much. A hair's width of late, a flutter sliding into a limp. But Yara Haddad had been listening to that heartbeat long enough to hear the difference between a buoy with a bad habit and a buoy starting to die.
Oh, don't you do this to me, Four. Don't you do this to me in a supply month.
The can smelled like hot electronics and a recycler filter that had been 3 months past its swap date for about 5 months now, which was a kind of math only the Reach supply office could produce. Yara had been tending Reach Relay ARC-9 for 4 years. The 9 chain, though it had been the 8 chain in everything but name, since the night she beat Buoy 8 to death saving a Vask runner, the Accord couldn't be bothered with. The chain had learned to live with the gap. 7 and 9 threw the long hop between them, the dog leg around the hush still dog-legged, traffic still flowed, and the Reach had accepted her power transient report with the enthusiasm of an office that didn't want to know. But a chain that had been built with 9 buoys and ran on 8 had spent its margin. That was the part the route maps didn't show. 9 buoys meant one could stumble and the chain would carry it. 8 meant the next stumble was structural. And 4 was stumbling. She pulled the morning's Keep Alive log and watched the cough do its new trick. For 4 years, 4's heartbeat had fluttered. A hitch in the rhythm, there and gone, harmless, hers. Now the whole beat was drifting, a few milliseconds late, then a few more, then catching up in a panicked little stutter and starting the slide again. An old machine's clock losing its grip, like a hand that couldn't hold a pen steady anymore. She knew the licensing manual's word for it, and she made herself say it out loud because pretending a thing wasn't happening had never once kept it from happening.
Desync. You're desyncing, you stupid old heart. 4 years of coughing and you pick now to forget how to count.
Desync was the word on the warning clause she'd broken twice the night she saved Ress. The reason touching a buoy's housekeeping layer was forbidden. A buoy whose clock drifted past the network's own tolerance didn't just drop channels. The chain stopped answering its handshakes, first sometimes, then always. And when the drift crossed whatever line the makers had drawn inside that opaque old machinery, the network marked the buoy, not faulted, gone. A desynced buoy never came back onto its chain. Nobody knew where the line was and nobody knew how to argue with it, because the judge had been dead a very long time and had left no appeals process. She called it in, because she was a journeyman with a ticket to protect, and because some small stubborn part of her still liked giving the Reach the chance to be better than it was. The licensing office took 6 hours to answer, which on the frontier counted as prompt.
ARC-9. We show your fault report on Buoy 4 of 9. Procedure for clock drift on a certified inheritance relay is quarantine. Drop it from the routing table before the network drops it for you, and file a replacement request.
Sure. And what's the queue on a replacement inherited buoy these days? Ballpark.
There was a pause with a shrug inside it.
Recovery supply category. The list is measured in years, and ARCs with active traffic get priority. ARC-9 is a low-traffic frontier route, already carrying 1 loss. I'd be lying if I told you it was near the top.
And an 8-buoy arc running 7 with 2 holes in it. Walk me through what your office does with that.
Reclassifies it. Below 7 sound buoys, the route doesn't certify for through traffic. The arc gets flagged unserviceable. The posting gets wound down. And the sector chart gets a bigger, no relay stamp. I'm sorry. ARC-9. I don't make the math.
She signed off polite, which cost her something, and sat looking at the board. Quarantine wasn't a fix. Quarantine was agreeing to the amputation a day early so the paperwork would be tidy. 4 drops, the arc dies, the posting winds down, and the frontier edge goes dark and stays dark. Every runner and rock hopper and late supply boat out here losing the one thread of comms that made the edge survivable. The Reach math said, let it. She told the board what they were going to do about the Reach math.
Yeah, we're not doing that.
The problem underneath the problem was simple, and it was the kind of simple that had been sitting in plain sight her whole career. To fix a drifting clock, you discipline it against a reference. Every comms tech learned that in the first month. So, what did the buoys use for a reference? The reach documentation said the chain synced, each buoy trimming itself against its neighbors, the network agreeing on time the way a crowd agrees on a rhythm, no conductor required. She'd never had a reason to doubt it. Doubt cost extra, and the manual was free. But Four's neighbors were beating steady, and Four was sliding anyway. Sliding like a buoy that couldn't hear the rhythm at all, not like one voting against it. So either the mesh's story was wrong, or Four had gone deaf, and there was exactly one instrument on the can that could tell her which, and it wasn't anything the reach had certified. She got the spike down off its hook. The spike was half a licensed reach signal analyzer and half a salvaged VASC reader, married together on a workbench by a younger Yara who had wanted to hear the things the certified gear politely declined to see. It was on no equipment register. It heard everything. She put it on the Keep Alive band and went looking for the rhythm the buoys kept. The conductor, the manual said, didn't exist. It took her most of a shift, because the thing she found was quiet in a way she had no word for at first. Under every Keep Alive on the chain, under Four's limp and one's steadiness and the gap where 8 used to be, there was a pulse, not a buoy's pulse, fainter than any Keep Alive, slower, perfectly regular, and under every single buoy she pointed the spike at, as if 8 old machines strung across 400,000 kilometers were all tapping their feet to the same silent song. The buoys weren't agreeing on time with each other. They were all listening to something. The mesh had a conductor after all, and it had been conducting since before the reach existed. So faint and so constant that no certified instrument had ever bothered to flag it, the way nobody files a report about gravity. Four wasn't voting wrong. Four was going deaf. Its clock circuits were too noisy now, too old, too coughed out to hear the quiet song underneath everything. And without the song, it had nothing to hold to, and it slid. She said it softly to the spike, to the chain, to nobody.
Okay, so who's singing?
She already knew. She'd have known it asleep. But knowing and charting were different disciplines, and she was, whatever else her file said, a charting kind of woman. The pulse arrived at each buoy a breath apart. Tiny offsets, the lag of distance, the spike's VASC, half-resolving differences no human gear was built to care about. 8 arrival times made a map. She'd made this map before, a year ago, with Keep Alive curves instead of clock lags, and she'd marked where its lines all bent around. Now she laid the new map over the old chart and watched the arrival times converge on a point she had already drawn, beside her own block letter note, next to the reach's no relay. The center of the hush. The pulse the whole network kept time to was coming out of the one place the whole network had been built to leave alone. She sat with that for a while, in the quiet of the can, with the filter-sour air and the dust motes hanging dead still in the lamp beam. The makers had built their network to bend around that place. Everyone knew that now. She'd charted it herself. But this was a different thing, and a heavier one. You avoid what you fear. You don't set your clocks by it. The buoys kept their distance from the center the way you keep your distance from an altar, and they kept its time the way you keep a faith. Whatever was in there, the people who built half the galaxy's plumbing had wanted it left alone, and had wanted, just as deliberately, to never stop listening to it. Both things, on purpose, for longer than anyone alive could count. She thought about Ressa's voice coming up out of the dark a year ago, reciting the thing all VASC are taught young. Kept, it turned out, like a metronome is kept. The quiet had a pulse, and every old machine in the sky moved to it. She said it at last because awe didn't fix buoys.
Right, you can be terrifying and useful. Plenty of things are both.
Because here was the thing the awe was sitting on top of. Four couldn't hear the song anymore. But the song was still there, under everything, untouched by the hush, untouched by distance. The most reliable signal in the universe as far as anyone could prove. She could not fix Four's old ears. She could not make the maker's clock louder. But she could make a 5 hung next to 4, healthy, steady, its Keep Alive strong, and 4 could still hear 5 because keep alives were the lowest, most stubborn signal there was. Deafness to the quiet song came long before deafness to a neighbor shouting. Keep alive timing could be bent by hand from the can. She'd proven that a year ago, in the worst night of her career, bending 8's heartbeat into a telegraph. That trick sent words. This needed something simpler and much harder. If she retimed 5's keep alive to beat, not carrying a message, not stuttered into code, just exactly phonetically on time, then 5 became the song, sung loud. A metronome bolted to 4's ear, and if the makers had built the buoy's lock circuits to listen for exactly that cadence, and they had, the whole chain proved it every silent second, then 4's drifting clock might catch the beat through its own noise and pull itself home. There were 2 problems, and she named them to the empty can in the interest of honesty.
1. Bending 5's heartbeat is the same clause I broke for 8, and 8 is dead. 2. Nothing on this station can hold a phase lock to a signal only the spike can hear. Except me.
Problem 1 first, because it was the one with a clause number. Touching the housekeeping layer was forbidden because it risked desync, and on its face this was the same crime twice. Reach into a healthy buoy's heartbeat and bend it. But the night she'd bent 8, she'd bent it from the network's time, off into telegraph stutter, away from the song. That was what desync meant. She understood it now in a way the manual's authors didn't. Desync wasn't, desync was, and she was not proposing to bend 5 away from the reference. She was proposing to bend it the reference, to make it keep the maker's time more exactly than any buoy had kept it in 10,000 years. You could not fall off the beat by landing dead on it. The clause forbade touching the layer because the reach didn't know what the network's time. She knew. It was the first time any human had known. She logged the clause number anyway, with the time, the way she always did. Under it, she wrote, Problem 2 had no clause number, which made it worse. The spike could hear the deep pulse. The can's console could drive 5's keep alive timing, but no certified system would close the loop between them. The console didn't know the deep pulse existed and had no input for an instrument that officially didn't exist either. The loop would have to close through the only component on the station that could hold the spike in one hand and the timing trim in the other. She rigged it like she rigged everything: tape, patch cable, and refusal. The spike cradled at the console where she could watch its trace. The headset over her ears with the spike's audio bled into the cracked ear cup. The deep pulse rendered as a soft tick. Tick, tick, slower than a resting heart, older than the species listening to it. Her right hand on 5's keep alive trim lived through the housekeeping interface. The forbidden layer opened under her fingers for the second time in her life. And then she did the thing no sensible species would do, which her whole species was for. She closed the loop by ear and hand and became the instrument. Tick, trim, listen. 5's beat sat fat and human sloppy on top of the maker's pulse, milliseconds wide of true, and milliseconds were the whole war. Tick, trim. She walked 5's heartbeat onto the song one shaving at a time, watching the spike's phase trace close like a long pair of scissors. An hour to get inside the width of a breath, 2 more to get inside the width of a thought. The deep pulse did not waver, did not hurry, did not care. It had been keeping perfect time since before her species had fire, and it would keep perfect time after. And somewhere in the 4th hour, she stopped feeling like she was tuning a machine and started feeling like she was being permitted to touch the hem of something. And she made herself drink from the chipped mug and stop having feelings because the trace was not closed and awe didn't trim oscillators. Out in the dark, 5's Keep Alive began to sing the maker's time at full Keep Alive strength. The quiet song, loud for the first time in 10,000 years. And 4 heard it. It wasn't fast and it wasn't clean. 4's drift slowed the way a skid slows. Fighting it, sliding past the catch point twice, its noisy old clock circuits grabbing at the loud new beacon of the true beat and losing it and grabbing again. On the board, 4's heartbeat trace bent back toward the others by degrees. The handshake failure counter, which had been climbing for 2 days, climbed slower. Stopped climbing. Started once to fall.
That's it. That's it, Four. The band's right there. You've been hearing it your whole life. Come back on.
She held the lock through the 5th hour. The spike had been running at full gain the entire watch. The VASC reader, half doing work no VASC had ever asked of it, resolving a pulse out of the quiet at the bottom of the universe and feeding it to a human ear in real time, hour after hour. She'd built the spike for sampling runs. Minutes. Not this. Somewhere past the 5th hour, the rust-red trace developed a flicker that wasn't in the signal, and she knew her tool the way she knew her buoys, and she talked to it the same way.
Don't you dare. 20 more minutes. He's almost on.
The spike gave her 11. The VASC reader died the way old salvage dies. No drama, no spark, just a working thing becoming a warm dead thing between one tick and the next. The trace went dark. The tick in her cracked ear cup stopped, and 4 was still 9 minutes from a lock the network would hold, sliding at the edge of the catch point. The only place the maker's time existed now, anywhere a human could reach it, was in the muscle memory of Yara Haddad's right hand and the echo of 5 hours of tick, tick, tick laid down in her bones. She had counted a stranger out of the hush once. 1, 2, 3, 4, burn. She closed her eyes and kept the count. 9 minutes is nothing. 9 minutes is 540 seconds. 9 minutes keeping another thing's time with your hand. Blind, no trace, no tick in your ear against an old machine's last drift. 9 minutes of that is a career, and she spent it all. She did not think about the center of the hush keeping this same time a light hour away in the dark. She did not think about how many millions of years the beat had gone unmissed or who had set it swinging. She thought, trim, hold, the way you hold a count for a terrified kid in a falling ship. The way you hold a rhythm your hands know after your instruments die. Her whole improbable species in one wrist. No catalog, no certification, no business succeeding. Keeping the predecessor's time by feel, because the alternative was letting a heart stop on her watch. The board chimed. Buoy Four's heartbeat trace slid in among the others and sat down in its old place like it had never been anywhere else, and the handshake counter fell off a cliff, and the routing table, which had been quietly drafting Four's funeral for 2 days, marked the hop sound. The network took 4 back. Whatever line the makers had drawn inside the old machinery, 4 had come home on the right side of it. Yara opened her eyes and let go of the trim and discovered her hand had been cramped for some unknown number of minutes and had not mentioned it. She set it to 4, to 5, to the quiet song she could no longer hear.
Good, good.
She let 5's keep alive trim ease back to its own natural beat, gently over an hour, and noted with something between pride and a shiver that 5 barely needed the walk back. It had liked being on the true clock. The whole chain read cleaner than she'd ever seen it, all 8 hearts beating a shade closer to the song than before, as if her one loud night of perfect time had reminded everybody what the music was. She filed the report before she slept, because tired filing was honest filing, and the clause number again with the time and 1 line under it. Then because she was honest with her own log even when it cost her, she added the casualty line. She took the spike down from its cradle and turned it over in her hands. Half of it had come off a reach bench, and that half was fine. The half that had heard everything, the salvaged VASC reader, the alien ear she'd married into it a decade ago, was cooked beyond any repair she knew how to do. Somewhere out there was a VASC runner who'd burned out of the hush on her count, who said the accord never answered, and a human did. The VASC named their tools and carried their deadened cord in grief. Yara set the spike on the shelf above the console, where she could see it and did not put it in the scrap bin, and didn't examine why. The supply run was still late. The filter still needed swapping. The chain was still 1 buoy short of its name. The posting still hung by the math of a distant office, and the dark wedge off the far end of her chain had not gotten 1 degree less wrong, was worse now if she was honest, because now she knew the whole sky set its watch by whatever slept in there. Nothing was solved that mattered to anyone but a few hundred frontier nobodies with one comms line. It was enough. Out here it was always going to have to be. She was most of the way to the bunk when she remembered the spikes buffer. The little tool logged everything it heard. That was the whole point of it. And it had spent 5 hours listening to the deep pulse at full gain before it died. 5 hours of the maker's time recorded. The only recording in human hands. Probably the only recording anywhere. Because who else would have pointed an illegal alien ear at the bottom of the universe and held it there all night? She pulled the buffer to the console to archive it, started the playback scrolling just to label the thing, and watched 5 hours of the steadiest signal in creation crawl past as a flat, perfect, comforting line. Except at hour 3. At hour 3, 17 minutes in, the deep pulse skipped. One beat, missing. Not late, not weak. A hole in a rhythm that had no holes. And then the song went on exactly as before, as if nothing had happened. And in the same scroll, half a breath after the missing beat, every keep alive on her chain, all 8, healthy and sick alike, stuttered once together in perfect unison. The whole network had missed the same step, the way a congregation pauses when the cantor pauses. She ran it back 4 times. It was real. It was in the log. At hour 3, 17 minutes in, the clock at the center of the hush had, what? Hesitated, breathed, turned over in its sleep. Notice something. She did not archive the buffer to the reach system. She copied it to a hand chip, the kind of object that fit in a boot, and she labeled it in block letters the way she labeled everything. Then she sat for a while with the chip in her cramped right hand, in her quiet can, at the edge of everything, under a sky full of old machines keeping faithful time, to a thing that had, once, for one beat, on the one night a human was listening, stopped. Hour 3, 17 minutes in. She checked her own log out of bone-deep habit, and the line was right there where she already knew it would be, in her own handwriting, time-stamped. Hour 3, 17 minutes in was the moment she had brought 5 onto the true clock. The moment a human hand first played the maker's time back into the dark, loud, on purpose. The chip said nothing. The chain beat on, faithful as ever, around the kept and patient quiet.
Oh, I really hope you didn't hear that.